You know, for the poet William Blake, the human soul was this constant battlefield. On one side, you've got innocence, on the other, experience. And his poetry? Man, it's this incredibly powerful, sometimes shocking window into life, faith, and just how brutal 18th century England could really be.
So, to really get Blake, you gotta get the world he was living in. And I'm not just talking about tough times. This was brutal. The Industrial Revolution was kicking into gear, and for the poorest folks, that meant hardship you and I can barely imagine. We're talking about children, okay? Kids small enough to be shoved up a chimney, sold into this life of soot and suffocation, a life that often ended in a very, very early grave. This is the world Blake was staring right in the face, and he absolutely refused to look away.
And Blake, he doesn't just tell you about it. No, he puts you right there, right in the middle of all that suffering. These are the opening lines from The Chimney Sweeper in his Songs of Innocence. And that cry, weep, 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 it's a gut punch, right? But here's the thing. It isn't just a sob. It was the actual street cry these little boys had to use to advertise their services. Think about that. An innocent sound completely masking the absolute horror of their job.
Okay, so let's dive in where Blake starts in this world of innocence. Now, when we say innocence, it's not about being naive or just, clueless about how bad things are. It's more like a state of the soul. It's a way of holding on to faith, to trust, to some kind of spiritual hope, even when the world around you is just relentlessly cruel.
The speaker in the poem introduces us to this new kid, Tom Docker, and he is terrified. His hair, which Blake says curled like a lamb's back, what a powerful symbol of innocence, right? It's just been shaved off. They did it to keep the soot and lice out, but for Tom, it's his first real violation in this brutal new world.
And the comfort he gets? It's based on this heartbreaking kid logic. Hey, if you don't have any hair, the soot can't ruin it. It's such a simple, innocent attempt to find a tiny silver lining where there really isn't one. This is how they get through the day.
And that little moment of comfort, it leads to something much bigger. That very night, Tom has this incredibly vivid, almost prophetic dream. For Blake, you see, dreams are like windows into the spiritual world, and this one gives Tom a vision of what it would be like to escape.
So the dream starts with this absolutely terrifying image, these coffins of black. Well, they're the chimneys, of course, the ones they're forced into every single day. Blake doesn't mince words. He's telling us flat out, this job is a living death sentence.
But then, a miracle. A moment of divine intervention. An angel shows up with a bright key and unlocks their chimney coffins. And suddenly, they're all free, running and laughing on a green field, washing all that black soot off their bodies in a river, becoming pure and white again. It's this incredible vision of spiritual cleansing and total freedom.
And here's the moral of the dream, the big promise. Just be a good boy. Endure all this suffering. Do your duty. And in the afterlife, you'll be rewarded. God himself will be your father. And it's this heavenly promise that lets Tom wake up the next morning feeling happy and warm, even though he's about to go back into the cold and the dark for another deadly day's work.
This idea of finding hope in the middle of all this misery, it pops up again in Innocence. Let's take a quick look at another poem, Holy Thursday. At first glance, it seems like this beautiful, heartwarming scene of public charity.
Blake paints this incredible picture, right? Thousands of orphans from London's charity schools, all scrubbed clean for the day, and they're being marched, 2 by 2, into the magnificent St. Paul's Cathedral. He says they look like a multitude of flowers, and when they sing, it sounds like a mighty wind. On the surface, it's just a beautiful, really moving sight.
But hold on. Blake is an absolute master of subtext. You have to look closer. Their faces are clean, which implies they're usually dirty, right? And the men leading them, these beetles, they're carrying wands, which are basically discipline rods. And their angelic singing, he also describes it as thunderings, which hints at this huge power, maybe even a rage, boiling just beneath the surface. Blake is showing us the performance of charity, which isn't necessarily the same as the real thing.
And this brings us to the huge question that just haunts this whole world of innocence. Is this faith, this hope for a reward in heaven, a real, genuine spiritual comfort? Or is it a dangerous illusion, a tool that society uses to keep the oppressed quiet, to keep them in their place? Well, to answer that, we have to flip the coin. We have to enter Blake's second state of the soul, experience. This is the world after the fall. This is where innocence has been completely shattered by the harsh realities of a corrupt, hypocritical society. All that hope is gone, and what's left is a cold, clear-eyed critique of how the world really works.
The shift is just night and day. You see it perfectly when you put the two chimney sweeper poems side by side. In Innocence, the takeaway is, hey, if you do your duty, you'll be fine. But the sweeper in Experience, he's got no time for those illusions. He knows for a fact that his little uniform is the clothes of death, and his street cry is a note of woe.
So in the Experience version, some adult finds this poor kid, a little black thing among the snow, and asks him where his parents are. And the child's answer is just devastatingly direct. They're at church, praying. And then he delivers these final, crushing lines. The child of Experience sees with perfect clarity who's responsible: God, the priest, and the king, the entire power structure of the church and the state. He gets it. He understands that their heaven, their comfort, their power, their piety is built directly on top of the misery of children just like him.
This idea, this heaven of misery, it's the absolute core of the world of Experience. It's a world where all the so-called virtues the society teaches you are exposed for what they really are: tools of oppression.
See, back in Innocence, Blake wrote a poem called The Divine Image. It was all about how mercy, pity, peace, and love were virtues from God that you could find in the human heart. But now, in Experience, he flips it on its head. In a poem called A Divine Image, the human heart now belongs to cruelty. The human face is the face of jealousy. This is what society has done to us. This is the corruption of the soul.
Blake's critique here is so radical, you can't overstate it. He's not just saying, oh, society is unfair. He's arguing that the very moral teachings of the establishment, especially the church, are what create and perpetuate all this suffering. And one of his most famous poems shows you exactly how this spiritual poison does its work.
This is the story of a poison tree. It's this chilling little tale about what happens when you bottle up your emotions. So, the speaker is angry with his enemy, but instead of talking about it, he hides it. And he nurtures that hidden anger. He waters it with his fears and tears and suns it with fake smiles and deception until it grows into a tree that bears a deadly, poisonous apple. And in the end, his enemy sneaks in, eats the apple, and dies, a victim of the speaker's hidden, festering rage.
Now, on the surface, it's a fable, right? A warning about suppressing your anger. But Blake was aiming at a much, much bigger target. And the key, the real giveaway, is the poem's original title, which he changed later on. Any ideas what it might have been? Christian Forbearance. Bam! With that title, the whole poem becomes an attack. Blake is arguing that the Christian doctrine of turning the other cheek, of patiently forbearing and suppressing your natural anger, isn't a virtue at all. He believed it was a spiritual poison, one that corrupts the soul and in the end leads straight to death.
And that leaves us with Blake's furious, incredible vision. A world where the big institutions, religion, the state, create a heaven for the powerful that is built on the literal misery of the innocent. It was a radical, explosive idea back in the 18th century, and it leaves us with a pretty challenging question for today, doesn't it? Where, in our own world, do we still see that same paradox at play?